One of the first places that I want to explore is this idea that I think for almost every believer has asked this question and had to wrestle through this. And this is this whole idea of, is God really involved in my life? Because when I'm going through something hard, I can't find him. I can't hear him. I can't feel him. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. It's sort of this, I'm in the cone of silence. Mm-hmm. And I don't know of any believer, and you look back into the Psalms, and certainly the sort of our faith forefathers, they've experienced that. That is a question that really for so many, that's where they'll stop. Because if they don't feel like they can hear God, they don't even know what to do with their questions.
Exactly. And just for the benefit of our audience, Kim, I mean, after doing over 60 events in churches of all different denominations, we took questions live from our audience. And after receiving over 6,000 questions from Christians, just like the ones listening to this program tonight, do you know one of the top questions we received was exactly what you framed up, the silence of God. I mean, for those of you listening tonight, do you ever feel like God has unfollowed you? Do you ever feel like God's unfriended you in your life? Do you ever feel like God is just ignoring you, this heavenly ignore? Well, the silence of God, what I realized was the silence of God is real, it's personal, and guess what, my friends? It's biblical, and it's not always a bad thing. In the studio here tonight, I have my wonderful wife, Audrey, of 12 years, and my wife and I, this is, of the 6 subjects that we discuss in Unanswered, Kim, this is probably the one that's most personal to us, because here we are serving the Lord, where we both feel a calling to ministry, we're working in the local church, and yet after 5 years, we were unable to get pregnant. And for those of you that have struggled with infertility, you know how personal that can be. That can be a very difficult situation. And then you have wonderful people who are praying for you every Sunday that reminds you really that you're not pregnant. Are you pregnant yet, Audrey? Are you pregnant yet, Jeremiah? And that almost can become a difficult thing, a challenge in and of itself. And after 5 years of struggling with God's silence, my wife and I working together saying, you get to this point where you feel like you can't hear God, and the enemy sends you these lies, and you're like, is there some sin in my life, God? What am I doing wrong? Why aren't you hearing me? God, are you there? I mean, these were the kind of prayers that we were praying together as a couple. And then, you know what we did? We decided we would go to the Scriptures, because it's a very isolating thing. I mean, when we struggle with the silence of God, the enemy wants us to believe that we're some kind of second-rate, second-tier Christian. And for those of you that are listening to Kim and I tonight, I want you to know that you're not a second-rate, second-tier Christian if you're struggling with the silence of God. It's really the opposite. This is God wanting to take you to a deeper level. And my wife and
That's so hard for people to...
Exactly.
It's so opposite of what they're feeling and seeing. Yeah. I just want you to say that again and then continue your story.
For those of us who struggle with the silence of God, so often we can feel like we're the odd man out, that God doesn't have a plan for us, that there's a major struggle in our life, that God's taken his hand off us, and yet God is taking us to a deeper revelation, a deeper understanding of himself. And after 5.5 years of my wife struggling with the silence of God through infertility, God has promised to make us fruitful and multiply, and yet here we are serving the Lord. I think the all-time low for me, Kim, was praying over a couple in our church that specifically asked me to pray over them who could not get pregnant. They got pregnant after we prayed over them, and yet here I could not get pregnant with my wife. And the good news of the story is what I want to share is we went to the Scriptures like all of us should go to. We don't trust our feelings. We don't trust our emotions. We trust the fact of our faith. And Audrey and I began to read the Scriptures, and we realized that people like Abraham and Sarah struggled with not once but 2 times. When you study the chronology of Genesis 12 through 18, Abraham and Sarah, and remember in James 2:23, Abraham is called the friend of God. This guy was God's friend, and yet he struggles with 25 years of God's silence. God tells Abraham, you're going to have a son. He's 75 years of age. He doesn't have a son until he's 100 years of age. Or look at Joseph, who was sold in a human trafficking incident in Genesis 37 for just simply sharing the dream that he had that God gave him. At the end of Genesis 40, if you read it, it literally says that he was forgotten in prison. Do you think Joseph felt like God had been silent in his life? My wife and I were reading these things, and then we're realizing that Jesus Christ, we actually hear this in Mark 14:34 and 35, in his native tongue, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. He says in his Aramaic tongue, it's the Aramaic tradition, my God, why have you forsaken me? Then what's the next thing he quotes? Jesus goes to the Psalms, what you just said so beautifully. 2,461 verses in the Psalms. I think every single one of them are a promise from God. I take Audrey through this, and Audrey takes me through it, and we begin saying, God, we just need to trust him. Reckless, abandoned trust in God. And guess what? Finally, we get pregnant. We have a daughter, Lily Faith Johnston, And then 2 years later, a son, Justin. And Kim, as I just shared with you before we went on the show, my wife is pregnant with triplets right now. And we're just laughing like Sarah did. I mean, she names her son Isaac, which means laughter in Hebrew. We're laughing at the goodness of God.
You got to come up with 3 names.
Exactly. So, long answer for you, but I want to encourage, this is the one that's most personal to us, and that I want those who are, many of us who are struggling tonight with the silence of God, to know there is an answer, and He is taking you deeper.